I'm going to kick off really with a brief presentation about productivity. I approach this, as Joe said, I'm the economist that works for Cumbria LEP, so I'm approaching this really from the perspective of an economist looking at how Cumbria's economy performs, put that in the context of the UK, etc. I'm conscious that there are a lot of people here on the call, on the Zoom, from businesses, and where the interest in productivity is not so much the economy as a whole, but your own business. This presentation is based on a recent deep dive that I undertook with Ginny Murphy for Cumbria LEP, looking at available data on productivity for the economy as a whole, and it really updates work that was done 2 or 3 years ago when we embarked on the local industrial strategy. Some of you will have seen versions of this presentation, so apologies for that, but it's got a slightly different twist today. So I'm going to start off with just being clear what we mean by productivity. It's a term that's used by economists, politicians, people involved in business. Essentially, it's an idea of efficiency. So how much output do you get for the inputs that you put in? Economists measure output generally by something we call gross value added. In essence, that's the difference between your sales less your cost of sales. So what difference do you make as a business? What value do you add to all the inputs that go into your production of goods and services? Now, it's important to say for Cumbria, the data that we have is only for labour productivity, and I'll just show there on the screen what that means. That is essentially your output divided by your labour input. So that's either the number of people working in an economy or a business, or the number of hours they work, and that's a measure of labour productivity. Economists do use other measures, other productivity measures, and we like to also consider the amount of capital that's used, the amount of equipment and buildings. That can make a big difference to productivity, but we're not able to measure that for Cumbria. So economists have this idea of total outputs divided by total inputs, so that's labour and capital, and something called total factor productivity. We can't go into that today, but it's just important to bear in mind that in Cumbria we might have 2 firms that are highly productive in their sectors. So we've got the Idle, which is an IT firm working in the financial services sector based in Penrith, and we've got Iggesons, who manufacture paperboard out there on the west coast. Both very productive firms in their own sectors, but you'll see that obviously Iggeson is employing far more plant and equipment in what it does, and therefore its productivity measured in terms of output for the amount of labour it's engaged will look higher than the Idle. So just something to bear in mind when we talk about the figures. Joe asked me to explain why productivity matters, and it might be obvious, but I think there's 4 reasons that it's important to focus on it. Firstly, and probably most importantly, if as an economy or as a business we're more productive, it means that we can afford to pay more wages, and generally speaking, that we're more profitable. Now, when a business or a sector is involved in competing in international markets or national markets in particular, productivity is really important, because without high productivity, it's very difficult to be competitive when you're dealing with other firms from advanced economies such as Germany, Japan, USA, etc. And in Cumbria, we got a really important reason, which is our tight, limited and falling labour pool, something that I'm sure you're all well aware of. And improving productivity really makes sense in that context. So we haven't got too many people floating around able to work in the economy, so we need to find ways of working smarter, not harder, getting more output for everybody that's employed. And I think finally, and quite topically, clearly as the cost of certain inputs rises, such as energy, this is squeezing profitability, and unless businesses can improve their productivity, that's going to have a major impact on how successfully they can operate. So there's a quote from the Industrial Strategy Council, and at a UK level, it's crucial productivity because it's linked to wage growth, and in the long run, it supports living standards and competitiveness. So we've got a UK context here, and that's really important because I'm going to be focused on Cumbria, but actually we've got to start with the UK picture. We know, and you've heard widely quoted, that the UK is not as productive as some of its major competitors, such as US, France and Germany, and that productivity has been flatlining in the UK since about 2008. Well, what do we mean by that? If you look at this graph here, up until the financial crisis, productivity was growing something like 1.5 to 2% per year on average. Really over a long period of time that has been happening. And then we had this happened. We had productivity flatline, so it's barely increased for the UK over the last 12 to 15 years. And part of that's because there was the effect of the financial crisis, but also since then, even taking account of that, productivity has been flatlining. So we're not producing more output per our labour inputs for the people employed in the workforce, and that's not rising the way it has been doing historically. So what about Cumbria then? So we're starting off with the context where we know we're not doing terribly well at the UK in terms of productivity. For Cumbria, there is a quite significant gap on the performance at a UK level. So measuring labour productivity per job filled, 19% below the UK average, per hour worked, it's 17%. So we're quite a way behind the curve. If we compare ourselves to the Northwest, which might be a fairer comparison, some might argue, we're still 10 to 12% below productivity levels in the Northwest. So on either measure, somewhat behind the curve. And I think importantly, and perhaps slightly worryingly, the gap's actually got worse in the last few years for which we've got data. So taking us up to 2019, which is the last year for which there's reliable data, productivity levels, either measured per hour or per job, compared to the UK, have been dropping, and that's against that picture of the UK performance itself flatlining. So appears a slightly gloomy picture in terms of what's happening to productivity in Cumbria, but there are a number of reasons behind this, and which I'll try and explain in a moment. But economists try and look at all the factors that explain productivity, and there's all sorts of different explanations. But broadly speaking, there's stuff that happens within the firm. So what capital's employed, I mentioned likes of Igerson that got a lot of capital equipment, what technology is being used, what skills are being used, how they're being deployed, how well trained and effective is the management in managing all of that. These are all things that happen within a company or an organization, and I guess probably be the focus of the workshop this afternoon. And then sort of cutting across all of that, there's something called innovation, and that means different things, but it's all about how, whether your goods and services are being updated, you're coming up with new products, whether you're looking at new processes, it's about how all of these things, all of these factors that explain productivity are being changed and updated and improved over time. That's what we generally mean by innovation. And then there's a whole load of things which happen outside an individual firm or organization, which we know are really important. So the wider physical infrastructure, so the transport network, the availability of digital broadband connectivity, for instance, availability of sites and premises, increasingly sources of energy supply, and then where you are in the country, how close are you to your suppliers, your customers, your collaborators, how large is the labour pool, and what's available locally to support you as a business in terms of expertise and other individuals that might help management. So there's a raft of things that explain productivity at the level of a company, a place like Cumbria or UK as a whole. And one of the things I just want to draw your attention to, in the in the research that's been done on the UK, there's this term of the long tail. And essentially, if you look across any sector or any set of businesses, you've got some that are on the right that are highly productive, and some that are on the left that are less productive. And broadly speaking, if you look at the UK's very, very productive firms, they are world class and world beating and perform as well as international peers. But we seem to have more firms on the left, what we call the tail, than some of our other international competitors. So that the average performance of firms is sort of dragged down by some of the lesser performing firms in the UK economy. Now, we don't actually have that data for Cumbria. It's almost impossible to replicate this graph for Cumbria, but there probably is a similar kind of curve in Cumbria if we could get the data, because it seems to be something that is generic across the UK economy. And then moving on to Cumbria itself, I mentioned that we're, compared to the UK, about 20% behind in terms of our overall productivity levels. That's a result of two factors. One is the nature of our economy, the composition. You know, do we have much of our economic activity in sectors that tend to have high productivity, like manufacturing, or tend to have low productivity, like the hospitality sector? Well, that probably accounts for about 40% of the productivity gap, and the rest appears to be accounted for by productivity within sectors. So this chart is showing at a high level the productivity levels relative to the UK within each sector compared to the average for the UK. And you see on average we're about 20% below. There are some sectors where we do quite well on the left-hand side, and some that we do rather less well on the right-hand side. And if we take manufacturing, for instance, I know there's a few manufacturing firms on this workshop, and indeed the two case studies around manufacturing. Actually, on a sector by sector basis, Cumbria isn't doing too badly in terms of its manufacturing sector, but even within, there are some subsectors in manufacturing where productivity levels don't seem to be as strong as at the UK level. And then sectors such as construction, professional, scientific, ICT, we've got relatively low productivity rates compared to the national average. So that's a sort of explanation of where we are and how we compare to other areas, and I could go into that into more detail. But why is that the case? What are the factors that explain productivity? This is where we've had to try and draw on a variety of bits of research that have been done over the years in Cumbria and trying to do some benchmarking of performance. And we know that productivity, this is from national data, is highly linked to exporting. So firms that are more likely to export tend to be more productive. And we know in Cumbria there are some firms that are doing, you know, brilliant stuff and are very highly productive, and we'll have two case studies from them. The issue is about, if you like, the bulk of the rest of the firms and what's going on there. And sort of sifting through all that evidence, it would look to be the case that there is scope to increase the rate of innovation across many business sectors in terms of new products and processes, and Cumbrian firms seem to be less likely to engage with some of the opportunities for R&D investment that come out of various national programs than other parts of the country. We know there's an issue around the quantity of higher level skills that people employ to graduate level plus in the workforce. The prevalence and the intensity and the number of them involved in the workforce is lower than many other parts of the country. It's likely that the quality of management is ultimately a key factor in productivity. We don't have any hard and fast data on that, so that's surmising that that's the case. And also I've mentioned exporting, that we've got evidence that that's an important source of productivity, and slightly worryingly, the impact, it appears, of Brexit has been to slightly reduce the number of firms that are looking to engage in exporting. And so that's something where potentially there's something that needs to be done to try and encourage firms to get involved in exporting, kind of expose them to that international competition, which helps push forward productivity. So I'll leave it at that, Joe. That's just a whistle-stop tour through some of the findings, and happy to answer any questions and see what comments people have.
Thank you, Stephen. Before opening to the floor, and Jen, great if we could take the slides down. The last figures that we saw were 2019. Have you any sense as to whether the pandemic has made things slightly better or made things worse? Because we know that lots of businesses that previously didn't trade digitally, etc., have started to do that. Is there any sort of intelligence coming through that might give us some clues around that?
I think the short answer is there is no firm evidence, Joe, one way or the other. I think it may be that the shock from COVID-19 has accelerated quite a lot of businesses in Cumbria's use of digital platforms to to trade, to engage with customers and suppliers. And some of the issues that I mentioned, which are sort of to some extent factors of our geography, our location, in some sectors being far away physically from some of our markets, may become a bit of less of an issue. So that could help, or at least it provides the opportunity perhaps to improve productivity in some sectors where that's possible. But I mean, that's surmising. We don't have any data yet on that, but there's certainly potentially an opportunity there.
Thanks, Stephen. And first question is from Peter Fleming, and it would be great as people to say who they are, where they're from, and then ask the question. Peter, please.
Afternoon, everybody, and yeah, some interesting sort of feedback and thoughts there, Steve. I just wondered, and just coming from my own background, how much of, or what your sort of feelings are in respect to sort of Cumbria's performance with productivity is down to possibly a lack of knowledge and experience, particularly as a high SME count across Cumbria, in how to actually get better utilization and sort of efficiency across the use of resources in their business, which obviously impact productivity. Have you got any sort of thoughts on that, or what's your feelings on that?
I think your point about SME is a really important piece, because Cumbria's economy, as well as having kind of an unusual structure of sectors of the economy, we've also got a very high proportion of SMEs in some sectors. And again, this is sort of based on national evidence that it's undoubtedly the case that SMEs tend to be on average less likely to invest in management development and innovation and some of the things you've mentioned in your chat. And it's that bit harder because many smaller SMEs, certainly their nose is so much to the grindstone, they don't have time to think about the bigger picture and invest for the future because of their time horizon. So that is and some work I did on innovation for Cumbria. I mean, one of the messages that kept coming out of that with businesses saying they didn't have time to find out about what universities were doing and how they could collaborate. So sort of time and management time is a big issue, and that's obviously particularly an issue in SME. So I think it's a good question. I suspect the answer is that probably is a factor.
Thanks. And Peter, one of the other things that I think is quite interesting about Cumbria is the level of self-containment in our geography. Ginny did a piece of work that identified more or less 96% of people live and work here. And if you've not got hugely porous boundaries, you're not necessarily picking up what's going on in other places to be able to bring in some of that experience and practice. So I think for me, that's another interesting fact about our economy, the level of self-containment. And Julie's asked a question that sort of ties into the higher level skills. Julie, do you want to come in next, please?
Thanks very much. Hi everyone, I'm Julie Mennell. I'm co-chair of the LEP People Employment Skills Strategy Group. Stephen, I'm really interested in codependencies and interdependencies when you talked about the 4 drivers for productivity gains and how influential higher level skills are in terms of stimulating the ability to innovate, to export, to in terms of oversee the operation of the business? Are there ways that we can more easily understand and recognise the significance of that higher level skills dimension?
Yeah, I think it's businesses are about people, aren't they? And when I talked about management, management's people, isn't it? And people need to have the right skills, experience, etc., to manage their businesses as effectively as possible. I mean, and there is a danger of associating a qualification with skills and capabilities, as you'll be well aware. But again, this is not so much based on evidence in Cumbria, but there is over the years a lot of evidence about investing in higher level skills training, particularly management level skills, can have a really big multiplier effect on productivity and business competitiveness, kind of as you'd expect. So I think there is a strong relationship between all of those. Innovation, skills, management, those are all sort of almost like different sides of the same coin, I think, in many respects. So yeah, I think you're right, very influential.
Julie, anything you want to come back on that, or happy with Stephen's?
No, it's how we crack the various nuts, so to speak, in terms of being able to move forward. And it is that it's not one thing, is it? It's about looking right across the board.
I think it's
really stimulating. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just going to come back to you just to say that the point about SMEs, I think, is so important, because I know your university is doing some great things with companies, but it's a lot easier to work with a large company like BAE Systems or Sellafield. It's much harder to work with loads of SMEs, and I think that's the sort of real challenge, is how do we engage with those SMEs who are so busy with their time, to kind of provide them with some tools to look at ways of improving their productivity. Joe, there's something in the chat which is a bit of a techie question from Ian about GVA for Sellafield, and yeah, I mean, it's a weird one, because Sellafield is no longer actually producing any output, so it's not selling anything. So its contribution to Cumbria's GVA now is, I think it's all down to essentially its wage bill. And what's happened to Sellafield has been one of the factors that has recently led to the sort of dragging down of Cumbria's relative GVA. So it is one factor that's happened in the last couple of years, and it's so important to the economy that one single employer makes quite a big difference. So that's a good point by Ian.
Thank you. John Sidney's asked a question. John, do you want to tell us who you are and pose your question, please?
Yes, thanks, Joe. So I'm John Sidney. I'm a professor at the University of Cumbria, and previously I did work at Sellafield, so I understand Sellafield quite well. And one of the questions that I had was that GVA is an output measure rather than a kind of input factor. So looking at things like human capital index or economic complexity, if you looked at, for instance, the economic complexity of Sellafield and its supply chain, I think that would probably stand up quite well to other areas of the United Kingdom. Perhaps not financial services in the city, but certainly not that far behind. And the thing about that is that gives a potential to improve GVA if it's managed well. And I take the point about management. If we look particularly in West Cumbria, the educational attainment in West Cumbria is much lower than average in the United Kingdom, which is where I think maybe Julie's question came from. So, and I know we were talking about the kind of situation as is, but I think as people involved in industry in Cumbria, what we need to look at is the situation that could be, and perhaps the factors that may well drive economic improvement in Cumbria, in the future.
Yeah, thanks, John. I've not come across, I'm very happy if you offline fill me with the details. I've not come across this measure economic complexity before. I think it'd be fair to say that economists at a sort of national and international level use the kind of measures I've mentioned, use GVA as the output measure. I mean, I could have said that it's clearly not the be all and end all to measure productivity. There's other very important things like the impact on environments, net zero, people's well-being and happiness that are really super important, but they're not, kind of not perhaps part of this productivity discussion. So yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting to know more about this economic complexity measure, but I think that's not one that economists would use when they're measuring GVA.
So that's definitely one for an offline conversation.
So yes, be happy to speak to
Yeah.
John about that.
Yeah, I'll get in touch, Stephen.
Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. Next questions come from Rachel Jeffries. Rachel, do you want to come in? Rachel, sorry, you're on mute.
Shall I read out her question, Joe?
Yeah, we'll read the question and Stephen will answer directly for you.
In the factors affecting productivity, how much do the external factors, infrastructure and geography, affect this? And are there other LEP areas that are similar to us that we can collaborate with? I assume in terms of kind of working out solutions. I mean, it's interesting, when we did previous work for the local industrial strategy, we did look at comparators. There isn't really a comparator. Cornwall might appear to be a comparator to Cumbria, but it actually doesn't have a manufacturing sector really to speak about, and it's got a very different industrial structure. So there are very few places that are similar to Cumbria, but there are clearly some messages from other areas in the UK and elsewhere about how to tackle some of the challenges that Cumbria has, where you've got an economy where you've got lots of SMEs, for instance, and how do you work with SMEs when they're spread across quite a large geography. Issues that places like Scotland and parts of Scandinavia and so on have had to deal with those, and indeed parts of North America. So yeah, I think there is scope to collaborate on those. In terms of the relative importance of the internal factors within companies versus the external factors, I don't actually think we can, fully get to the bottom of that, because the external factors have an impact on the economic structure. So Cumbria, because of where it is, doesn't have a very large concentration of professional services firms that big cities do, because its economy doesn't lend itself to that. So you can't disentangle that factor from everything else. So they're all bound together to some extent. And I think any solutions have to be bespoke to Cumbria, but yeah, trying to pull on good practice elsewhere.
So thanks, Stephen, and we'll try to find out what's happening with your voice, because you don't say that you're on mute, Rachel, but sadly we can't hear you. Ginny and you mentioned the Liz, you actually identified a number of peer geographies, and what's interesting is our near neighbour, Lancashire, was one of them. So clearly there is something that we can be looking to do more joint working across the boundary. You've in chat, Rick, I don't know if this is a question for us or a suggestion, or you actually want to specifically pick up on how large employers help SMEs on innovation and productivity.
Thanks, Joe. It just feels like such a core opportunity to Cumbria. So I'm going to highlight this analysis that came out during the first lockdown. It came from the Enterprise Research Centre, which is a nationally funded body on economics and productivity, on small firms in particular. But what they analysed was across the LEPs of England, what is the productivity of small, of micro, of small, of medium, and of large? And it was the first time I've seen it being cut that way as opposed to sectorally. And so I think it provides another interesting data set to look at, because how they've ranked the LEPs, it's based on that black line, which is the large firm productivity. And where you see Cumbria, you see that on the black line, it's slightly above 100. And you're on the best end of that line. You're on the right-hand side where you'd want to be on the black line. So your large firms are more productive than the national average for large firms. And you're much happier there than where the other Northwest LEPs are. Look at where Liverpool City Region is and Manchester City Region. They're in the wrong end of that line. So that got me thinking, well, your red is a bit low, your green is a bit low, your blue is a bit low, but actually they're comparable to everywhere else. The micros, the smalls and the mediums, it's quite hard to see a trend there across all of England. They're consistently around, it jumps around a bit, but it's a relatively flat line. The only trend is in the black line. So it strikes me that not only have you got large firms who are more productive, but also your productive large firms are the secret sauce for Cumbria. Yes, we need a bit to focus on the long tail, but actually large firms is what you've already got. So that's why I just kind of come to with that question as to if there are examples of how the large employers of Cumbria are assisting their supply chain, are reaching out and helping the SMEs who are locationally proximate to them in a cluster, then that's a narrative I think Cumbria should be singing about, and I would like to help you to do so.
Rick, that's really, really interesting. I think it'd be fair to say that's an area where Sellafield have been, obviously investing a lot of time and energy with, some success. There's some of Sellafield suppliers are now moving into some really advanced technology areas and doing some great things. I think my concern about it is it only focuses on one part of the economy. I think that's linked to that very large employer, and it's quite geographically focused and it's quite sectorally focused. So it's not to say it's not really important, but it's part of the armory of solutions. It's not the only solution. And
yeah,
also
my understanding, Stephen, is that there are 55 large employers in Cumbria. So that's a manageable number to get a grip of and actually understand, well, who are they and what are they doing with their supply chains? 55.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And I think probably the LEP nearly knows all of them and has dealings with all of them. Some of them will have very limited supply chains. They're working in global markets. They've got global suppliers. Others have got much more of a local focus. But yeah, there's always scope to do more with those companies.
Yeah, I think that was a really, really helpful slide, Rick. And you remember we were both at the event with Dame Otterline, your Chief Executive UK. And I made the specific point about how do we make sure that UKRI's products really do reach the majority of businesses. Because for many businesses, I think they're slightly out of reach. And, your graph demonstrated that whilst micros are pretty much of a muchness, Cumbria really on two of the other groups. And really we get products to all of those businesses that may be outside of the supply chains of the larger business. So really interesting to look at how we take that forward in a structured way. On questions, and Peter, your suggestion on calculators will be picked up when we come towards the end and we ask what should we be doing, because Barry's killer question is, well, Stephen, all this stuff's really great. You've told us what the problem is, but what are we actually going to really do to solve this problem? And I'm hoping now Barry's posed that question, he and Jane are going to talk about their businesses' journeys and what they've done to address productivity. So for our case study, delighted to have Jane Morby with us. She's going to provide Oxley's experience as our first case study. So Jane, thank you very much, and over to you.
Thanks, Jo. Jen, have you got my slides? Thank you. If you can move on to the next one, thanks. So hello everybody, we're Oxley Group, we're based in Ulverston, and we're at the top end of the SME sort of size bracket. We've got 180 employees. We were founded in the 1940s by Freddie Oxley, an inventor, and Freddie had 3 values that he founded the business with. One was around family values, one was around investment in innovation, and the other was about self-sufficiency. And Freddie believed that if you could do everything in-house, you could be the master of your own destiny, and you could control quality and lead times. And that's a philosophy that we've retained in the business. It makes us quite unusual in terms of how much we self-deliver, but it does give us the ability, particularly at the moment when there's so many issues in manufacturing, to be able to be pretty much self-sufficient. Next slide, Jen, please. So we manufacture high specification LED lighting and systems and electronic components, and we sell them to defence primes across the world. We export about 80% of our product, and as Stephen said earlier, we do see that if you're exporting to the level we are, you have to be productive, because it's the only way to be competitive. A lot of our competitors are in countries like Germany, where we know they've got much higher rates of productivity, and if we don't compete with them on price, then we just can't win the business. I think also it's important to say that a lot of our products are very high specification. There's a lot of products that are made by hand. We don't have a sort of Siemens style factory of the future here. It's a very labour intensive manufacturing process that we have. And if you could go on to the next slide, Jen. So in terms of what the current pressures are, I think, again, we're seeing exactly the same as Stephen picked up on in what he was saying. We're in a period of coming out of COVID and recovering as a business, particularly impacted by areas like commercial aerospace and what's happened in that whole arena over the last few years. We are seeing the impact of the EU exit because we are a significant exporter, and we're seeing the impact of that particularly in delays and a lot of added bureaucracy in terms of paperwork and things like that. So really that's setting us back in terms of productivity, because we're having to go through so many more steps to do the same process we would have done a lot more simply before EU exit, particularly around like defence, exporting and licensing and things. The war in Ukraine is having an impact. It's having an impact on supply chains. It's slowing everything down, and we're seeing a massive rise in inflation. We're all under cash pressure, you know, particularly coming out of COVID. Manufacturers that have had to have seen a downturn in business over COVID, or that are having to now stockpile components because of component shortages around the globe, is putting cash pressure on. So there isn't necessarily the money available to invest in tech. So we're having to look at different ways to increase productivity that's not just about investment in technology. And picking up on the point that Stephen made as well, we're all facing this huge skills shortage. So how do we do more with less is definitely a theme. How do we work smarter? And I think the other thing with picking up on Stephen's point about the difference between the big companies and SMEs, there are some real positives about being in an SME, in that you can be a lot more agile. You know, if you're trying to turn around a really big organization, it's that whole analogy about turning around a tanker. You can respond to things a lot more quickly and do business turnaround programs much more quickly in an SME, because you've got the ability to be more agile and to working in a really different way when you're much closer to your teams. So productivity is really important for us. We do it to be more competitive and to enable business growth. And here, you know, you can do it through technology or you can do it through people. And very much what we focused on is doing it through people, and that's sort of what I'm going to focus on today. And if you could just move on to the next slide, Jem. So where we were at 3 years ago, we had a disengaged team, poor motivation, really poor productivity. So we started a journey to see how can we engage our team better to improve productivity. So for us, it's really been about cultural change and employee engagement. So we did an employee engagement survey. We've now done 4. The first one showed us that we needed to work on a lot of areas, particularly 3 key areas of improving recognition, communication, and personal development. And we needed to have a vision, mission, and values that would unify the workforce behind a shared set of challenges. So we developed a vision, mission, and values, and we developed work streams under recognition, communication, and personal development. And if you can go on to the next slide, please, Jen. So we really focused around people and culture. How do we change the culture of the organisation? And as I said, we're an 80-year-old business. We've got a very ingrained culture here. So what we did was put together a communications team, which was a group of 10 people, 10 positive and enthusiastic people from around the business, and at all levels from all different departments. And we started to have a monthly meeting with those people to talk about how do we deal with some of the factors that are demotivating people. And first of all, we dealt with all of the hygiene factors. So we talked about the window that won't shut properly, and the fact that this area of the factory doesn't have a water cooler, and all of those things. And we dealt with 100 of those, and we just did every week. You said and we listened, and we took away all of those hygiene factors. And once we'd dealt with all of that, we then started to say to people, right, how do we move forward? How do we improve what we're doing? Can you come to us with suggestions of how we can work better? And that's when we started to get the more proactive responses from people about, well, I've had an idea that we could change how we do this, because this process is really cumbersome and really slow, and it's full of errors. And that's when we started to then be able to work on some of the positive aspects of being able to engage people and work together to deliver improvements. We changed our employee proposition again to remove those demotivating factors. So we got standardized terms and conditions. We started to do much more in terms of team activities, a lot of team building, a lot of social activities. And a lot of this sounds very soft. You know, it sounds like going on having a group quiz, you know, isn't going to change the productivity of the organization, but it actually does, because you're engaging people and you're building a team spirit, and that's what's made the difference for us. We started to recognize people's achievements. So you'll see there a picture of people receiving certificates. We got involved in things like a soapbox challenge. We have something on every month. Coffee mornings, we're doing something for the Ukraine on Wednesday this week, because people feel bought into the business and they feel pride in working for the business, and that changes people's behaviour. And the other thing we did was a business improvement MVQ program. So we asked people from all over the business to get involved in delivering business improvement. So we put together cross-functional teams, and we trained them in business improvement techniques, things like how to do a value stream map, tools like PDCA, and we then set them a project in a different area of the business to go and do a go-look see in a different area of the business and look at how they could improve that process. And so we had a number of those successful processes going on around the business, and then people were bringing those skills back into their day job and improving what they were doing in the day job. And also people, we've got one lady there in that photo, she's worked for Oxley for 35 years. She never had a single qualification. So it was a massive opportunity for her to undertake doing an MVQ, and she felt great about it when she'd done it. And again, it's made her feel proud, it's made her feel engaged and part of the team. And the next slide, please, Jem. The other thing we really looked at was visual management, because we identified that people were coming in and doing their job, but they didn't understand that the part they were playing in the whole. So it was, for us, very important to flow down our strategy. So we now do quarterly all hands team briefings, we do a monthly newsletter, and we don't only tell people the soft stuff, we tell people this is our strategy, this is what we're trying to achieve, and this is how we're going to do it. And we do that through an X matrix model. The X matrix is displayed all over the site for everybody to be able to see, and then people are held accountable to what they need to deliver. But this helps everybody in the business on the shop floor through all functions to understand what we're trying to achieve and what their role is in doing it. And then we started to put numbers onto boards, and actually just putting a number onto a wall changes behaviour, because all of a sudden people focus on that and they try to achieve it. So putting targets on walls, using SQDCP and putting red marks where we miss a day, where we get an error, people's behaviour changes because people don't want red dots on their SQDCP. So it focuses people's attention on areas that they need to address. And we also did process focuses. So we did a deep dive into certain processes and looked at how we could improve them. We use data to drive them, and we use the people who are involved in the process day to day to tell us what they wanted to improve and change. And next slide, please. So as I said, this isn't just a sort of soft activity, it's really delivered real tangible business results for us. Participation has gone sky high. Our employee feedback scores have increased every year for 4 years, even through COVID. On our SQDCP, we've improved in every measure. And one of the big areas we've improved in is in right first time. And actually, if you get things right first time, it massively improves your productivity, because what was impacting us was reworks all the time. It was quality issues and reworking existing parts. If you focus on getting things right first time, and you'll see there 21% increase in right first time, because people understand what they're doing and they understand the role that they're playing, and they've been involved in designing the process, and they understand that they can flag when there's a problem, or when there's a way of doing things better, and they've got a mechanism for flagging that and actually formally flagging it. And then there's a feedback loop where they get recognition for actually doing that. And we've had, the first year we did this, record turnover, we increased our profit. And the journey's not over yet for us. And if you go to the last slide, Jen. So where we're going next? We're currently out to consultation on moving to a 4-day week, and we're doing that for a win-win-win. We want to give employees a better proposition of coming to work at Oxley, because we know we've got to do something radical to recruit because of this skills shortage. We know we can save money by not opening the site on a Friday, because we will, predominantly because of energy costs. And we know doing 4 long days, we can be more productive. So we're hoping if this consultation goes well, that we will start that trial imminently. And we're continuing the measurement and improvement programs around really focused areas of the business, and using the skills that we've embedded through the business improvement techniques to deliver some of that. And we're also looking at tech, how we can digitalize parts of the process. And again, that doesn't need to be a factory of the future. We've been here 80 years, we've got old equipment, we've got an old site, but we can still use big data, sensor technology. We can still use some digital techniques to be able to improve our productivity. And, you know, just a quick shout out for programs like Made Smarter that will support SMEs in terms of advice and funding for digitalisation. And finally, we're completely committed to sharing best practice, happy to work with any other organisations that want to come and see what we've done here. And as I said in the chat, BAE do have a supply chain network, and we're hosting the next visit, the next event of that here at Oxley in April. We're quite unique in that we don't have any customers in Cumbria, and we don't really have a supply chain in Cumbria because of the nature of being self-sufficient. But we do believe in wanting to grow the economy of the area, to make Cumbria a really great place to live and work for Cumbrian people. And that's the end. Thank you.
Jane, that was fabulous. Thank you very much. And clearly our primary school teachers were onto something with the star charts, weren't they? If you can see it and you actually want to become competitive about performance, that's what we all need to get back to. Can we hold questions for Jane until we've heard from Barry, please, who likewise is going to share the experience from his business? Barry, over to you.
Thanks, Joe. Joe, how are we doing on timings that you were so particular about at the beginning?
Oh, timings that I was not at all particular about at the beginning. In terms of timing, we're absolutely fine, Barry. So if you could do us about 12 minutes, that would be absolutely.
I will do you 12 minutes because I feel like I've been stitched up. I know I was a last minute replacement and you didn't tell me I was on with Jane, who's absolutely brilliant at all of this. So when she said put her slides up, I was like, right, what slides have I got? So I have actually got some slides on productivity and Playdale I'm going to share with you just so we can go through. However, if anyone wants to go and make a brew for 10 minutes, you'll find there's an awful lot of crossover between what Jane and I have done. And the reasons why for that is, I think we're at the forefront of working out that collaboration really is key. And, you know, myself and Jane, we've visited each other's places. We've looked at each other's charts. We've swapped ideas. And I think that's a starting point. And it's interesting hearing the beginning of it and the presentations, because, you know, I love it when people start arguing about productivity of why, or if we could be better if we looked at another scale. Well, we're just bad at it. All right. And we just need to get on with. And you said my question, which prompted all of this, is so what we're going to do about it. And I think that's the bit to focus on. So I'm going to focus on what Playdale did when we realized, and I'll tell you why we realized we were not great at it. So let me have a go at sharing some slides. He says, hopefully you see some slides. You see my screen, is that right?
We can see your screen. Thank you, Barry.
Okay. So this is a couple of years old, this presentation, but it's from a European manufacturing summit a couple of years ago. So people that don't know us, I'm Barry Leahay, I'm the CEO at Playdale, and we make playgrounds just like that in front of you. And that one is actually in the beautiful Lake District. We're all over the world. We're in 51 countries. We operate in leisure attractions like Brockholes, or a school there with one of those big businesses in the distance in looking over to Barrow. We do things like hand sanitizer, which I think we'd be more productive if everyone just washed their hands in the UK, which I've noticed in other countries, they have a lower sickness record because they take health seriously. And we're very proud, just like Jane, everything we do is made in the UK. 51 countries around the world, which does, like you said at the beginning, makes you more agile in the way that you operate as a business. However, I think it's also down to people and people's ambitions. And I think if people are more ambitious or have a different mindset around work, then they will go and get higher level qualifications and they will look at ways that they can improve their business. what I actually, and this is only Barry's opinion, and I'll get shot down at the end, but I blame the big businesses in Cumbria and I blame the big mountains, because we've got second, third generation of unionized big businesses, which brings all its problems on and make changes and steeped in culture. And we've got these big mountains that people move to Cumbria or have a lifestyle of where they work to live and not live to work. And if you're in the southeast, it's more live to work. So we've got all of that perfect storm in there, and those big mountains are difficult to get across. So people need to leave work bang on time is what my thoughts are, or that's what they try to tell me. But what was happening at Playdale? Well, you see that we're in the press a lot, and it sounds like we're a fantastic story. But behind the scenes, we were like this. And in 2015, Playdale were about a minute away from going bust. All right, and that's not something we put out in the press. And why? Because we'd refused to change, and we'd been slow to change, or we'd convinced ourselves because we were doing some change, we must be better than the rest. Only the rest were changing quicker than we were, so we're already going backwards. So we said, right, and at that point I'd spent, I don't know, 500-600 flights in of going around the world and seeing these beautiful shiny factories that are a lot more productive than we are. And I thought, there's something in this. What are they doing that we're not, and why are their people so happy whereas want to leave at 5 o'clock? And we had to change because the UK market was decreasing, so it was forced upon us, and we had to be, more competitive, and we had to be more competitive to win all the global business that we win now. So if we kept on doing the same old things, we'd get the same old results, which is the old saying. And I'm not going to talk you through Timwood, but if people are really into it, I'm sure they'll know this inside out. But we looked at each area of the business. But where we started first was with the people, just like Jane. All right, we did the surveys, and we do pulse surveys, and we do big surveys really often now. But we started really simple. We wanted to point out to people of how we do it, and we started off things like Tidy Fridays. And at this point we're losing £500,000 a year, just to put it in perspective. And people were like, what are we doing tidying up when we're going to make a mess again next week? And that's the culture we were in. Well, actually, if we all worked and didn't make a mess while we were working, we'd actually work quicker. And it was super basics, restructuring the business around people. But we started to listen, just like Jane, suggestions to the MD we started at. All right, we looked at the benefits that we're offering. We started comms groups, making sure that we were fully transparent and people could, feel like they were part of the business. Team briefs, one-to-ones. Everyone in this business has a weekly one-to-one with their team leaders. And we started to stand up and share our numbers. And where it was a lifestyle business before, a typical 9th generation family business, profit was a dirty word. Profit, if this business made 100,000 in a year, we were worried it'd be on the front page of the Northwest Evening News, and I'm sure it's not, more people have got more to worry about. So we started to talk about profitability in areas and where the business was, because staff realized profitability gave job security. And we've had a few instances since then with COVID, etc., where people have appreciated it because they see security. We started to look at policies. Jane said a really important word, I think, which is lacking, and it is accountabilities and making people accountable. So it's all right, it's two-way street. We're going to be very transparent, very open, but in saying we're going to change our policies and people are going to be accountable. And we had tears when we started using the words accountable. People were, literally tearful, saying, am I going to lose my job? No, but you're going to be responsible to turn up and do your job. And we turned over, I'm doing a presentation like this, and there was a PowerPoint, and I did the organization chart, and it was in upside down, and everyone laughed and thought I'd got the presentation wrong. It was like, no, managers, from now on, you're going to run the business. I'm just there to facilitate it. So I'm at the bottom and you're running this business, and it's not going to look the other way around. So we changed the responsibility, and we upskilled our team, not only the managers. I think during COVID, we had over 35% of all the business on some kind of higher educational course, which is massive, and it's now reaping its benefits. We looked at things like psychometrics in the team leaders. Why have completer finishers or not completer finishers running projects, and simple things like that, sharing the KPIs. We had strategy projects. And raising the bar projects, we started to call our performance reviews. One of the headings in there was, you know, are you a raising the bar individual? And people aspire to be that. And we had a talent team then, and very much a GE type thing, looking at businesses from the past. But the top 10% of the business were in a talent team, and the bottom 10% of the business we wanted to remove. And the great bit about it is, because they didn't want to sign up or get on this bus, they usually self-select themselves as well. So we're always moving the average bar up, and we send them down the road to Oxley's. No, we don't. I talked about the accountability. Charities. I'll be honest. I thought we were ticking the box. I thought we were ticking the box. We got, you know, a begging letter every day, literally every day. And I said, right, you know, CSR is a topic, and I'm going back probably 6 years ago now, maybe 7. And the engagement levels we have got through doing our CSR activities is huge. All right, and we now give 3 times the amount we used to charity, and the engagement and the belonging of the, you know, the team activities that go on, you know, it's just massive, and it creates a really sticky situation for staff, and it's great. And while I'm on, a selfish plug, I'm swimming the Great North Swim if anyone wants to sponsor me. We gave everyone laptops, we gave people flexibility. And we threw, you know, right, so the challenge is, I'm forgetting the presentation from 3 years ago, the geography, lack of accountability we've talked about, and lack of skills. Well, we know all of that, don't we? And we've got the opportunities to put it right. I talked about the business, utilizing the educational establishments in the area, going to master classes, be it at Lancaster, or looking at what courses we can do in Cumbria or down in Barrow at the university. You know, we start to do that and developing people, but we got experts in as well. We tried to, you know, brush off some of this arrogance that we had of we knew best. You know, I had a production manager who went on a year's course and came back and went, oh, you know what, maybe we were doing it wrong for the last 30 years. So looking at what experts, you know, give you, and then also listening to what was within the business, things like learn at lunches, people on educational courses. It was more than that in 2020, and started to change the way we employed people. We looked at our recruitment process and interviews, and we're looking for attitudes. We're looking for a sparkle in people's eyes. We can upskill and train people. We want people with the right attitude. Went heavily into apprenticeships 5, 6, 7 years ago. And we've got some amazing success stories. We redid our values. Instead of one of those primary aims as we had that was a paragraph long that people had walked past for 20 years and still couldn't recite, we made it really simple. All right, we are a team, you know, and you can see there, we trade worldwide. Quality and excellence is everything. We're very inclusive, and we're working on that, and we're upping our game again still on the inclusivity and the diversity side of the business. And I have the best job in the world because I make smiles all over the world. But we talk about being a team, you know, and it about being a fun environment. So it's like CSR helps with all of that. And what, you know, Jane was talking about, doing those activities, it works, it really does. And then we moved on to technology. Then we moved on to Made Smarter. We're the biggest user of Made Smarter in the whole of the Northwest. You know, we have got some fantastic digitalization, but before we could move to all of those things, we had to get it right. We went to boards, we shared those numbers, like Jane said. People hold us accountable. We used to put them up. You know, we used to tell people at the end of the quarter how they'd gone, and then we did it at the end of the month. Now we put weekly data up, and our big investment this year is we're going real-time screens that people can see how they're doing by the minute, because it's our fault if we're not telling them how to improve. We threw it out to the staff. We've got a register, a CI register, so a continuous improvement register. We've got something like 180 ideas on there. We've implemented 60 of them. It's cost us £20,000 and saved us hundreds of thousands of pounds. And each member of staff that gets one implemented gets paid £25, and they come up like that. This is from one of our operatives in the assembly area, put together the case study and asked technical to help them with a drawing to put a slide jig together that we've been doing the same way manually and needing 2 guys to do it for 25 years. And for £25, he designed that. However, at the other end of the spectrum, now that we're making good money, we're putting in £300,000 laser pipe cutters to just take us to the complete next level. Collaboration, I've talked about where we collaborate. And I know I've got Julie on this call, and we will use the University of Cumbria more, but different organisations that we use. What's it done for us? The so what, as I'm famous for saying. So we've reduced our stock by, you know, a huge number, yet we're more efficient. Our on time in full, Jane showed that. All right, jump in at 20% in theirs. Last year we were at 94%, and that was in where we were interrupted with our supply chains. Supplier ROTIF, making people accountable into us, moved across just a period. Our efficiency gains, and we reduce our efficiency every year. We redo our bombs. All right, so that means basically we give people less time once they create the new norm. We've saved, it's more than $500,000 now. This is a couple of years ago. Just to summarize and finish on that, we were losing £500,000 in 2015, and in 2022 we will make 1.5 million, of which £1 million of that is through efficiency and productivity gains. So if you've got the desire to do it, it's more than possible. And I'll stop sharing my screen now because I don't think the rest is relevant.
Barry, that was fabulous. So thank you to both you and Jane. And probably Stephen's question originally posed to Jane applies to both of you. Stephen was asking, was there internal support or advice on the processes you've gone through? And I think I would extend that to say, Barry, you talked about your catalyst change was very much $500,000 loss. But what else catalysed the change? How did these programs really get energy? Jane, do you want to kick off first?
Yeah, so for us, a big driver was that we had a desire to move out of, well, we predominantly operate in the military market. We wanted to move into the commercial aviation market. So that would mean supplying the likes of Boeing. And that was a very different model for us. It would require like a just-in-time delivery model, and it would, you know, people I'm sure have heard what it's like to work in automotive. It's the same to work with people like Boeing and Airbus. So we had to get our act together, and that was the big driver for us. We were involved in a government-funded program called Sharing in Growth, which was a program for high-growth aerospace companies. And we got some of the techniques through involvement with Sharing in Growth. But the real key is embedding them. It's not just doing them for 3 months and then just letting them fall away. You've got to embed them in the business, and you've got to keep using them. You've got to make sure that you make it part of the way that you live and breathe every day, because we are all busy, and it's easy to go, well, we won't bother having a daily stand-up today. But once you start to do that, then all the activity slides. So it's really about embedding it and then having a really strict regime of following the good practices.
Thanks, Jane. And Barry, beyond the need to turn finances around, where did that catalyst and that momentum come from?
Well, the original bit is exactly that. You know, when your bank manager tells you he's about to shut the business and make 150 people redundant, it focuses the mind. But what that then very quickly was, you know, if we're going to turn this around, we need to involve others, and sharing. And we're using people like Be the Business, a fantastic benchmarking tool they've got on productivity, which is downloadable from their website, I believe still. You know, we did that and we came out as average. And sharing that with individuals who thought we were great. It's a realization moment of, you know, are we going to make this happen? You know, are we happy at being average or less than average in some areas? And the collective was there, you know, and it's a very British thing, isn't it? We fight when we're on the beaches, and that's what happened at Playdale. That's what sparked us into action, really. The backs were up against the wall. And it was, you know, siege mentality of, come on, we're going to make this happen. And then over time, that became enjoyable, and the next challenge arose, and you baked it in. You know, the resilience was there, and enjoyment and the speed of change just gets them go, oh, what's going on in that meeting room, and it's change, and the habits formed and they're moving on to the next habit.
Brilliant. I've got a couple of questions in chat, and I've also got Julie's hand up. So Peter, do you want to ask your question first, please?
Yeah, and I think it's this, just to share, I obviously help businesses with consultancy, etc. But actually, I'm getting more and more involved in mentoring and sort of sharing my past experience. I just wondered, Jane, Barry, if you were mentoring an SME with maybe 20, 30 employees, what would you suggest be the first step to take to tackle productivity?
Can I answer that? Because Peter, I do mentor businesses with 20, 30 employees. And the first thing that I say to people is know the numbers, because SMEs have a lot of noise. And because there can be system light, but it's about filtering out that noise and actually understanding the facts. So we get some baseline data that then we can analyze and actually benchmark that data. And like I said, that's what helped Playdale by doing that benchmarking and the realization of actually where we were at.
And Jane, from your perspective?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point that Barry makes about measurement. I think, again, when you're working in an SME, you spend all the time in the business, and it's that, how do you get that move out to spend the time on the business and not in the business? And you have ideas about how things are in terms of your numbers, but until you stand back and do that formal measurement, then you're just working anecdotally on what people think. But I think in terms of tech, I would look at talking to somebody like Made Smarter, who've got the expertise to come in and audit the business and tell you where you can make improvements, and start with your people in terms of an employee engagement survey and find out what they really think. Just do it anonymously and find out what the people in your team think.
And Stephen's observed that, the message seemed to be invest and improve people and processes first, then start to think about tech. Does that seem a fair summary of? Jane's nodding, Barry's nodding, so I think that seems a fair summary of the approach. Julie, you wanted to come in, and then I've got Ian to come in, please.
Yeah, thanks very much, Joe. Thanks, Jane and Barry. There's so many similarities, and it doesn't matter what sort of business and sector and so on. What's come across really strongly, I think today, is that people dimension. And also, Barry, very when you said about when you're on the beach and fighting and so on, and you've got to draw on everything that everybody's got. I just wanted to talk about the university as a business, and then ask your views in terms of your own business. Often we're talking about in terms of high level skills and so on, but we're a 70 million business with 100 employees. When I first came to the university, we were in a period of rapid decline, and we're now on a significant growth trajectory. And there were many questions that we needed to ask in terms of who, what, where, how. However, the most significant question that we asked that really helped to galvanise us in terms of focus and so on was the why bit. It's a bit like what you've said about the values and the belief and hearing from the staff, and getting that why bit right, both internally and externally, served as the catalyst that Joe talked about in terms of us being able to move the business of the university forward. So I just wondered, Jane and Barry, what you feel, and perhaps what you could share about that really understanding purpose and staff and stakeholders getting behind the business, because it's a really important thing that's being done. So any thoughts?
For us, there was definitely a what's in it for me scenario. As much as you like to think that people are doing it out of out of altruism, you know, there was very much a what's in it for me. So again, part of that is reviewing our employee proposition and looking at our bonus scheme and our bonus structure and how we can incentivize people to come with us on the journey. And again, like Barry said, there is very much that the purpose bit is some of the community outreach work that we do with young people on skills and some of the charity support work that we do, because that develops a real sense of pride in working here. Oxley's is a family-owned business, and you know, we make it very clear to our people that our heart's in Cumbria. We've been here for 80 years. We want to be here in another 80 years, employing their children and their grandchildren. So that really has been the hearts and minds piece for us.
Very similar, you know, but the stakeholder side of stuff, you know, I think it's very important. We got that. You know, I'd like to think we've got it right. We involve everyone. We get them involved. My bank manager knows what my psychometrics are. He thought I was bonkers with sharing it with him, but this is who you're dealing with and what you're about. But that's what worked within the team. You know, hey guys, this is what we're all about. But the purpose, I am known to diffuse situation. I've played videos of kids coming down slides and having fun. And it diffuses. You'll get people come back at you and go, yeah, but listen, are we going to deliver smiles on children's faces? And let's work out how to do it. And yeah, all right, I've got that on my side, so I'm going to use that as a tool, but it usually gets us to where we want to be, and people suddenly find a way of doing stuff.
Fabulous, thank you. Right, I think, Ian, the final question, and there's also one around the 4-day week, and I know, Jane, you've been speaking to other businesses that have looked at their change in hours. Ian, you wanted to ask about financial outputs. I mean, Barry talked about the massive increase in profitability and performance, but what else would you want to explore?
Yeah, no, thank you, Jane and Barry. Brilliant presentations. It just links back to Steve's opening gambit. So it's just a simple question: can you make a direct measurement of the improvements you've made in terms of a GVA? Are you able to directly quantify that, or is it more complicated?
Yes, is your answer, Ian. A really quick one. But however, I do an awful lot with manufacturers, and you introduced me to a manufacturer that uses the phrase GVA. But is our productivity improved or our efficiency gains? Yes, immensely. Our pounds per hour has gone up in everything that we do. So yeah, I know our GVA has improved because it's only bureaucratic forms that ever ask for it, so we work it out quite a lot.
Same as Barry, we don't use the term, but we know our productivity has improved, efficiency gains, cost savings, improved contribution per head. So all our measures are going in the right way, but GVA isn't something that we use as a term in the business.
And Stephen's asked a question, Jane: how far is the 4-day week being driven by interest from employees?
Yeah, completely driven by interest from employees. We did a challenge and change survey that asked people, completely driven by the fact that we're struggling to recruit because of the skills shortage, to ask people what changes they would like to see in the business as a tool for aiding retention. And that came out really strongly as a theme that we needed to look at. And then when we've looked at the feasibility of it, we believe we can make savings in site shutdown on 1 day a week, and the 4 long days actually support some of our cycle times better than doing a short Friday. So we'll give it, we're doing a year's trial if the consultation goes ahead, and we'll see how that goes. But we have been talking to other businesses and hearing their experiences, and good and bad, and we're working that into our proposition. And I think sharing best practice is really critical for as an SME community in Cumbria, we work closely together. So, and we do share best practice in completely different walks of life, you know, in playgrounds, in making marmalade, in, you know, making LED lights. We work together.
Brilliant, thank you. So in our final 5 minutes, really suggestions about what we want to do. Stephen and I have already agreed that we're going to explore further RICS data to understand where we are in terms of some of the groups that do underperform and the disparity between our large businesses. You remember from the graph that the micros were pretty much on a par, but the two other types of businesses were actually significantly below the average. So I think we've really got to do some work to say, what is it that those businesses need to support, and how do we make the kind of links that we're already looking to make between our large businesses and our SMEs. Barry actually responded to Peter's question by saying Be the Business has got the productivity calculator. So I think we can work with colleagues in Be the Business, who we do work with, to say, how do we get that promoted more widely? The other big message that we're getting from businesses is there is a real lack of catalytic grant funding at the minute. So the kind of relatively small sums that would help people to take an investment risk have vanished out the system. So we and the LEP are looking to say, is there something that we can do to help with that? And that would be relatively, you know, tens of thousands rather than hundreds of thousands, but might make some smaller businesses be able to make that leap. A big theme that came across for me was very much about the people piece and developing talent and making sure that we have people in the business that could really drive forward some of these things. But what sort of other suggestions would people like to make about what we really need to be looking at in addressing the productivity challenge? Not got anything coming into chat, so thoughts would be really welcome. John, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I was really interested, Barry, in your use of Made Smarter, something which I think is a real leg up for an awful lot of businesses of all sizes. I was just wondering, Joe, how well do you think Made Smarter is understood in smaller businesses in Cumbria? Because it can look like, you know, unless you're in rocket science, it's not for you, but there's an awful lot of common sense in Made Smarter.
Well, John, we've got the perfect person to tell us, because Jane is actually on the steering group for Made Smarter and has presented at numerous events telling people and extolling the virtues. So Jane, how well do you think it's understood, and what more might we do?
Totally get what you're saying, John, about this perception issue, because that's something that we have picked up a lot in the last couple of years, that people think it's robots running a factory, and they don't think that if they've got, you know, traditional site like we've got here, 80 years old, that there's technology that can be utilized. But actually the vast majority of the Made Smarter projects that have gone through in the last 2 years have been IT-based projects. It's not really been sort of a lot of robotics and things. It's been a lot of IT, sensor tech, that sort of thing. I do think that, I mean, Cumbria is overperforming as in the 5 Northwest LEP regions that were in the Northwest trial. Cumbria is overperforming, and that's not only just down to the number of grants that Barry's had, but you know, we've got some really good case studies, and I would urge you to share those case studies about how it can be used in agricultural settings, in traditional manufacturing, and you know, we are waving the flag all of the time about it, and there is a pipeline, and there's a support network in Cumbria. So, you know, I would urge everybody to just keep sharing it, because the money won't be around forever. So the more we can get into Cumbria over the next number of years, the better.
That's really good, really encouraging. Thanks, Jane.
Joe, you're on mute.
I don't know how that's happened. Thank you, Barry. It's usually me saying that, isn't it? So we are at 4 o'clock. So it is time for us to sort of come to a close. But I think this is something that is significant. And I will make a plug for a piece of work that Stephen is doing for us that follows up from a research piece that he did with EPSRC. And that was very much looking at innovation. And the next stage of the work that we're going to be delivering is a series of case studies. And clearly, if we're looking at innovation case studies, that will actually give us things that businesses are doing that will drive our productivity. So I think there's lots of things that we can be sharing because these will be publicly available case studies. And I would hope that the businesses will be willing to share their stories in the way that Barry and Jane have today and give us food for thought in terms of the diagnostics that we use for business support, etc. So can I say a huge thank you to Stephen, our economist, for the overview presentation as to what's happening, to Jane and Barry for fabulous case studies, and a big thank you to everybody that has joined today. Stephen's put that we need to learn about how their experience can translate into other sectors. So we'll make sure that that happens. As I said at the outset, we are recording, so we will share this with a lot of people that wanted to join but couldn't today. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. We really appreciate it. Thank you.